there's sort of a bluster I had for much of my life, a feeling of being, an invincibility that I think a lot of people feel. But there was a bubble that was kind of burst, that this feeling like, if I'm the kind of person who can step into traffic and almost kill myself, what else? What else is there? What else is wrong with me? What else is broken?
That's Andrew Kerr, and this is The Sound of You. Hey, my friends. Welcome back. It's me, Davin Youngs, and this is The Sound of You. And I'm happy that you are here joining me for this conversation that I had with someone who I think you're going to find to be incredibly fascinating. His name is Andrew Kerr, and he is, amongst many other things, a gifted and talented singer-songwriter who has been down a somewhat winding road with his voice and singing and music and, quite honestly, his life. I was thinking that I will never forget the first time I met Andrew, because I actually heard him singing at the top of his lungs walking down the hallway to the space that we were going to meet in before I even saw him. And I learned quickly that this is how Andrew sort of approaches his life. It's how he enters a scene, so to speak. But what you'll hear in this conversation is that Andrew candidly shares that energy and fervor and bluster, as he refers to it, has at times led him down complicated paths. In fact, it led him into the path of an oncoming truck, which you are going to hear all about. What's so great about this conversation is that Andrew is so successful in understanding the integration of these life events with the journey that he went on with music and his voice. And he speaks so clearly and with so much wisdom about how changing his voice and following the path of deconstructing and reconstructing his voice as an instrument was a key component in changing his whole life. So sit back, listen, enjoy, and just soak in these incredibly wise words from my friend and former client, Andrew Kerr.
Okay, so it was about 10 years ago. I was crossing the street in Evanston, and I was hit by a city truck. I was thrown 21 feet in the air. I sustained 3 skull fractures and a broken arm, and I was rushed to Evanston Hospital and spent about 2 weeks in the hospital there recovering. I had emergency brain surgery that first night because I had hemorrhaging in my brain, so I had an emergency craniotomy, carved a huge C-shaped scar open in the side of my head. One of the things coming out of it that I remember so vividly is in the weeks that followed, I was coming out of a heavy drugs they had given me. Everything was very hazy. I was aware enough to know that I didn't know if I was brain injured. I didn't know, I know what it's like. You hear about people who seem completely normal, except that they're violent once in a while, or they just have never been the same and something's shifted. And I genuinely had no idea if I was a different person, if I had had some kind of, injuries that would have permanently changed who I was. And that was a terrifying feeling. So I went through, cognitive therapy of different kinds. Different kinds of sort of rehab and therapy. They determined that they didn't think I had any cognitive issues. I still didn't know if something would come up years later in my life, if I'd have some kind of recurring things, migraine headaches in 20 years, whatever it might be. I also didn't remember exactly what had happened. I was crossing the street, I knew that, and then I woke up in the hospital. We ended up in a lawsuit with the city. We ended up going to trial, and I lost the trial. What I found out from the trial was basically it appears and it sounds like I was distracted crossing the street. I forgot something in my car. I probably spun around at some point. Did not see a large truck barreling down the street. It's kind of those things where the truck wasn't there a second ago. I have a feeling they came out from around a corner. They were also speeding, but I didn't notice them. I didn't check for them before I turned around. So what I learned from the trial basically was this was mostly my own fault. What I was left faced with in the months that followed was this feeling like I had done this to myself, and that I did not know how to forgive myself. Just the thought that I could have done this to myself. And there was no one else to blame. There was no scapegoat. It just felt like, I didn't know what to do.
So what were the implications for this sense of responsibility or culpability? I mean, in your words, you had done this to yourself. What did that mean for your life in that moment?
There's sort of a bluster I had as a younger, for much of my life, a feeling of being, an invincibility that I think a lot of people feel. But there was a bubble that was kind of burst, that this feeling like, if I'm the kind of person who can step into traffic and almost kill myself, what else? What else is there? What else is wrong with me? What else is broken?
Yeah. I say this not to make light of what you're saying, but it sounds like the sort of existential moment that only getting hit by a truck could bring.
Yeah.
But I also love this description you offer of yourself as a blustery young person. And I wonder if you could tell us more about yourself, particularly as it relates to growing up and music and singing.
Yeah. I grew up in New York City. I didn't feel like I sort of had found my place in high school where I fit in, and somewhere along the way I found theater and people applauding for me on stage, and people coming up to me afterwards saying how talented I was, and it suddenly was like, oh my God, I have like a thing. I have value. I have something that gives me value. So that's kind of where it started. And then I went off to college. I studied some theater. I started doing stand-up comedy because I wanted people to clap for me. I wanted to be on stage. I wanted to be loved. More than anything else, I think. I just wanted to feel validated. So that brought me on stage performing. Somewhere along the line, I think around in my early 20s, or maybe around 20, late teens, early 20s, I had been playing music as well, and I had been performing. And I found that I felt so vulnerable performing that I didn't think I could stomach the rejection that came with being an actor and being in theater. So I sort of thought what I loved about music was that no matter what happened at the gig, at the performance, I still had the song. I still had the actual music, and that felt like there was something sustaining and solid that I could fall back on. And I was really into songwriting. I was into James Taylor and singer-songwriters and Indigo Girls and sort of a lot of folky stuff. And I started playing open mics, and they might be terrible gigs, but I still could go home and, have something that fed me that wasn't just dependent on, like when I did stand-up, it felt like if they laughed, I was in heaven. If they didn't laugh, I was devastated. And I was like, I can't do this. It's too much. So that's kind of what got me into music and performing and touring throughout my 20s as a singer-songwriter.
Yeah, it's funny what you're saying, because I'm aware that we all have these different perceived levels of risk when it comes to performing and sharing. And I certainly can connect with the idea that stand-up comedy is so risky and vulnerable. But theater, to me, is a safer space in that, you have a prescribed outcome. versus writing and sharing your own songs. It just seems like there's so much at stake in that, and yet you found that to be a safer space to occupy.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think the thing I always liked about songwriting was you know what it is? I think back on songwriting for me, I often didn't even, for example, I wouldn't know what I was writing about in a song, and the song would be moving along, and then suddenly, I'd write a chorus that just came to me, and I'd start sobbing, and I'd go, oh, that's what the song's about. I think I didn't have great access to what I was really feeling, a lot of my own feelings and a lot of what I was experiencing, and I tended to be clever, funny, cute, and then there'd be something in a song that would come up and go, oh my God, this isn't even about that. This is about this, devastating like loneliness of mine. Something like that. So I think it turned out to be very therapeutic for me that I hadn't had any therapy of any kind, and it was a means of sort of getting in touch with something that felt very sort of genuine and real.
I worry too much for a man of my age. I'm angry too often for a man without rage. I scare much too easy for a man without fear. I cry much too often for a man without tears. And I've learned...
Yeah, that's so interesting, and maybe that there was a safety almost in working that out through that medium.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's kind of like you're alone in your room doing your thing, writing your song, and then you kind of get your brain around it and then can go out and share it. And it's not like I was, I was pretty good at expressing myself, but now when I look back, I was, 10% of the way there. I didn't really know what was going on sort of inside my head. So that was the appeal to me for it was songwriting and performing. It was never about singing per se when I was younger. When I was younger, it was about being on stage, and then I found songwriting. I loved it, and I never really had any real training for singing at that point. And I wasn't a great singer. I kind of fought my way through whatever came instinctively. So that's kind of the groundwork for my vocal style when I met you and earlier in my life too.
Well, let's unpack that a bit more.
Yeah.
How would you describe your relationship to your voice at that time, and maybe specifically, how did that influence how you were writing songs?
So, I think one thing that I've recognized looking back, I could never really hear myself. I never really heard myself truly in a sort of critical way. And I think underneath it, there was this, my pitch was not good. More than anything, my pitch was not good. My tone was not particularly powerful or moving. So I found that if I wrote clever songs, that allowed me to kind of hold the audience, carry the audience. So it kind of moved me in that direction. But I think in this sort of powerful way that I look back on, I couldn't hear myself because I was too afraid to hear myself. Because if I truly heard all my weaknesses, I'd be too devastated to keep going. And there was something about sort of, I have this, when I was younger, what carried me on was delusional optimism, this sort of just push forward, don't hear anything that says otherwise, and just go. And it got me reasonably, it got me some success, just kind of plunging ahead. But truly underneath it, a fear to see all of my flaws and my weaknesses, and to sort of be vulnerable to that, because I was so afraid that would, I didn't know this, right? But looking back, I know I was too afraid that it would be too much. I'd be overwhelmed and I would stop trying. I would give up.
Okay, there's so much to dig into here. This is very rich because you're speaking to an experience that I think a lot of people who identify as singer-songwriters have, where they find themselves writing based on an idea or a story around what their voice can or can't do. So, sometimes people will write songs that are fairly limited in scope.
Oh, yes.
Because they don't really understand the capacity that their voice has, or they'll write beyond their sort of embodied experience of making the sound. And they're comes some point in time where inevitably they'll desire to reconcile the two.
Right.
And, there are certainly stories of people over time who were sort of never landed in the realm of being a great singer, but the songs were so rich and wonderful that they carried the voice. But I think there's this universal desire amongst anyone who sings to be able to connect and authentically express the words of the song in a way with their voice that feels aligned.
Yeah.
But from your perspective, based on your experience, what were the repercussions for not being able to, quote unquote, hear yourself at that time?
Yeah, I think it stopped me from, I continue to get I still look back and I'm like, wow, those are some smart lyrics. That is a good phrase. That's really like some impressive writing lyrically, but I could not become the singer that I heard, that I imagined, that I envisioned, that I wanted to be. I could not get better at singing. It was very limited where I could go because I had never developed any technique. So I was, straining and always flat and not breathing right. And just, a million things I was doing wrong, but never, almost just closing my eyes and covering my ears when I sang and powering through with just more energy. And that didn't make it better. And also then losing nuance as a result of that, just not developing. If you can't accept weaknesses, if you can't see your flaws, you can't get better at anything. In a fundamental way.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't that powering through that you referred to a bit ago, didn't that show up in your voice from a pathology perspective at some point?
It did. So I think about 10 years before I met you, somewhere in my late 20s, I developed vocal nodes in my vocal cords. And I went on complete total voice rest for like 6 weeks or something like that, which maybe you can do in your 20s more than you can later in your life. And I ended up getting surgery by a kind of a renowned surgeon in New York and fixed it. And then I went back to what I was doing before, take it kind of as a fluke, as a whatever it might be, not knowing what it was.
Right.
Eventually, so I continued doing what I was doing, and I was doing okay, and I had some, good moments and had some great gigs and had, a little bit of a fan base here and there and so on, and it was going okay. But at some point, and this is somewhere, this sort of ties into, I continued to sing and do what I was doing, and then I had, can we tie this into the time after the accident?
Yeah, no, let's go there because quite honestly, I'm curious what you see as the through line from this first surgery that you had to that fateful day crossing the street in Evanston.
Yeah. What's sort of profound is about my accident is that I still genuinely believe it was the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life, and it changed my life. And it took. It sounds corny, but it took being hit by a goddamn truck to change me. To wake me up, to truly have to sort of see myself, in a more honest way. What had happened, after I had my accident is I had this feeling like I couldn't forgive myself, and I went into therapy for the first time in my life. And, it led me down this path of sort of asking, questions about, look, if I'm the kind of person that can walk out in front of a truck and almost kill myself, what else is wrong with me? And once I started to sort of, unpack some things, I realized that I started to learn that I could be flawed and still be worthy of love. And at the core of it all, it's this feeling of like, am I worthy of parental love? Am I, it's some childhood things, that this feeling of like needing validation. And I found that in a fundamental way, like it was okay to be imperfect or flawed and to see my own flaws. So I continued performing, and I went back to music after my accident. I recovered.
I'm wondering what that was like to make music again after your accident.
So initially, I think I was kind of getting to a phase in my life now where I had young kids and a really active, crazy life at home, and I'd stopped touring. I'd sort of mourned the loss of this music career that I had dreamed of and wanted, but I had started to, at the same time, I found music more and more personal and therapeutic for me in a way it had never been before. I had at my shop, I had set up a piano, and I used to go there 4 o'clock in the morning on the weekends, all these times around my 3 kids at home and my busy schedule, just to sing and write songs. And I'd sob in front of my piano, and, it was just all for me. And it had never been all for me. It was to be on stage. It was to be loved and, clapped for. And I really didn't care about that anymore. Music had started to become something that was really a personal journey for me in a way it had never been before. And so I had been, sort of getting a little better at singing, but I had really specific limitations that I couldn't kind of break through. And somewhere along the line here, I started having vocal trouble again. I started not being able to hit notes. I remember going on a tour and I couldn't sing anything above a certain thing and below a certain thing. And I found there's these like spots that I had to jump through and skip through and work around and so on. And so I went to a doctor, and he took a scope of my throat and showed me various, nodules and bumps and things that were in there. He said that he thought with some occupational therapy or some speech therapy of some kind, it probably would go away, and some rest. So he sent me to someone who'd start doing some vocal work with me and to help me with some breathing techniques and so on. And she said, you should consider going to see a really good voice coach who knows proper singing technique. And I was at a point now where I had been through, a year or two of therapy. I was no longer as afraid to be flawed. And I thought, this can't hurt. I did not know quite what that would lead to and what it would mean. But it seemed like a reasonable step.
Yeah. Before we go any further, I just want to stop for a moment and acknowledge, Andrew, your ability to connect the dots between what was going on in your life emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, developmentally, and your voice story, because this is true for all of us. No one is exempt from this. But I'm just aware that when we hear this through a story like yours that has some dramatic twists and turns along the way, there becomes a clarity to our understanding of the connection. And you seem to have such a wonderful awareness of this. And it leads me to my next thought, which is around readiness, because it is often that we have to experience a series of events to finally be ready and able to hear or receive that which might facilitate change. And I just hear in your story that this was that moment.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering if you could then speak to what it was like to be in that moment in a place where you were going to finally be learning to, in your words, hear your voice.
Yeah. So I didn't know what I was signing up for, right? I just thought, I'd like to take voice lessons. It's always been something that I never really, I can't sing as well as I wish I could, and it won't hurt. And clearly I am doing something wrong because I've hurt myself for the second time. So why don't I take some voice lessons? So when I came to you, I was still, I guess the thing that was sort of most profound was that you very quickly, kind of told me that I was doing a lot wrong in my technique, and that in order to change the way I was singing, there were certain changes, and I don't remember the exact way it came about, but this feeling like fairly quickly, when I started following exactly what you told me to do, I could not sing my own songs anymore. I lost my entire vocal range that I had had before because I was straining, from my chest to hit these notes that should have been in my mix. so I could not do them anymore because I stopped straining. And without the straining, I couldn't sing. So suddenly all the things that gave me comfort and these songs that meant so much to me and made me feel like, safe in this little world, they lost them. And I remember so explicitly being with you and saying, Davin, you better bring me back because I am terrified. Like, it genuinely was like, I have to give up. You're asking me to give up, like, the thing that is most precious to me. And the risk of having to sort of trust you that you could get me back to a place where I could sing again was so freaking terrifying.
Some days my skin's unbearably thin, and every loss burns me within.
Well, there's this deconstruction, I have such respect for someone like you who's able to look at that risk in the face and actually pursue it, because there's a deconstruction process that has to happen for most people. And the thing that is so terrifying about it is that which provided you a sense of security in the past needs to be stripped away. But then quickly you realize that security was false all along.
It was false.
So that becomes existential as well, where you're like, sure. It's like that day after getting hit by a truck where you're like, I don't know who I am if this is not the case. So I appreciate that. And then also, like we were talking about, with regards to they're your songs, that they represent this piece of your personal identity. So that is more complicated than someone who is, singing in a show or something of someone else's stuff. It's like, no, I can't sing my own music. I acknowledge and am aware of the fear that would come with that. So what was it about you in that moment that allowed you to push on?
I mean, it was a good 6 months with you where I felt like I just could not reach the notes on my own songs, and it was a mess. But I felt like I was ready to take the journey. It felt like I had learned from therapy at this point that it's okay for me to be vulnerable, and it's okay for me to give things up, and that I have to give this up if I want to have. If I want something else, if I want to be better, I've got to be willing to be vulnerable. I've learned more since then how profound that lesson kind of is, in that truly, like, at this point, it was part of my journey to feeling like, if I can't be vulnerable, if I can't risk, I don't want to do it. And I don't mean that I want to risk in everything I do, but it is the way to grow. It is the way to become bigger. It's the way to experience life fully. For me, it is by taking that risk and being vulnerable and being real and being open and being okay being a mess and being okay doing a lousy job, and just, knowing that underneath it all, I am still going to be worthy of love, even if I can't, even if I fail and fall on my face. Once we started, I mean, it felt like as intense as my other therapy had been, more so even, because this was the thing that was my identity. It was the most important thing to me, and I really felt like I was handing this to you and saying, Dad, but I'm trusting you. I am not good at trusting people, and I'm trusting you to carry me through this. Because I didn't know how it was going to get there. You know the journey as a teacher, you've seen it, right? But it felt like also after 20 years of singing, I was completely stripping down and deconstructing this thing that I did, and having to learn a completely different way of doing it, having no idea except that you telling me so, that I would come out the other end. So the level of trust that it required for me was something also I had not been very good at, counting on other people and trusting in other people. So it was a profound experience for me too, to trust in you to take me out the other end of this.
Well, and I think that the thing is you're right. I have seen this process through, but there's a risk on my end too, and there's a vulnerability for any coach or teacher. There's a vulnerability too of because I don't know that I'm going to get you through this, and it would be deceiving of me to say that I did, because there's so many.
Well, you don't know that I'm going to be able to make all the right, take all the right risks, right? I might shut down a lot of things too, or not be able to be that open.
Or that I'll be able to do it with an efficiency that would allow you to stick it out, like that.
Sure,
that sort of
sure.
piece is
see the growth.
Yeah. And there are different amounts of time that people can like hang with something, right? So there are clients that will work on this stuff for years and years, and there are clients that are like 6 months and I'm out, So that, and so some that want 2 weeks and they're out.
Yeah.
But
one lesson, fix me.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most common things we see. But as you're telling me this, I feel increasingly aware of the many elements at stake in a partnership or in a relationship like this. Because while what was at stake for me was certainly very different than what was at stake for you, there is still this element of when I work with someone like you and I see that we've opened a certain door, there's an awareness that there's no turning back, and that we have to head down this together and be fully committed to seeing the process through. And, speaking of process, I wonder if you might then share with us what it was like as things started to shift and change for you.
I mean, in the big picture, I think after several months of committing to it and really kind of stripping it down, I regained my own songs because they weren't particularly vocally challenging. So I started being able to sing my own songs, which gave me enough validation to know that this worked, that it's working and that I'm working towards better technique. And then my range started getting better. I started feeling less tired at the end of singing. I could just see, continuing kind of results, which I still, when I sing now, I still find myself like I can hear myself in a way that I never could before. So I can hear, even now, if I get tired, I can hear what I'm doing. I can find it. I can kind of pick through it because, when you work with someone who enough being critical of it, I've become good at being self-critical in a lot of areas of my life now. So when I do things, and this is part of that journey of learning how to sort of break down. I'm good at learning now. So I know the steps that it takes to get better at something, right? And this is one of those cases where I can continue to grow because I continue to hear myself, see what I'm doing wrong, pick it apart, know kind of where to look when something goes wrong.
Yeah, and the willingness to see a problem and address it without judgment. Versus, I always like to offer that we need to be able to hear ourselves critically and not judgmentally. And there's a real specific difference between the two, because if I start from a place of judgment, it's like the original sin. It's like there's a failure at the heart of the matter. But when I can hear my sound or notice my body or notice a feeling or sensation in my body with a critical mind, I can go I can just be curious and say, could I do that differently? Is there a possibility of doing this differently? Which of course there always is. That's
so good. That's powerful. That's the whole thing, right? To be able to be self-critical without being judgmental and saying you're somehow not worthy or you're a bad person, No, there's a thing you're doing and you want to be better at it. So what can I do? Sort of looking at it a little more objectively, sort of stepping back a little more detached and work on the thing that you're doing.
Yeah. So then what about writing songs? How did this new point of view, this new ability to hear the new sounds you were making with your voice, how did this show up in what it was that you were writing and composing?
So one thing I think clearly, my melodies got better. I think I became a much better melody writer. I could write more interesting melodies. I can write for the things that I like to hear. I was no longer writing. I started doing more writing, starting with the music, not just about the lyrics, not just writing a bunch of clever lyrics and then finding some way to make them music. It started becoming more and more musical based, singing based. And I got better at not obsessing so much about I stopped trying to be so clever. I stopped writing kind of, and I can move people now with a vocal thing that I couldn't before, which it's a big change. So I don't have to work as hard. It stopped having to be, fighting to get someone's approval, and, instead just kind of sitting in it, just kind of being there and doing the thing.
Yeah, it's amazing how effort is not as satisfying as we think it is.
That's true.
That when you can actually sit back and rest and enjoy, that there is a satisfaction that is just totally different, and you get to be participant and observer at the same time. And I actually think I saw this in you at what I would call a culminating event in the form of an album release at this venue in Evanston called Space. Could you tell me what you recall about that performance and that night?
I decided I wanted to make another album, which I hadn't done in a number of years. I wanted to make sort of the album I always wanted to make. I wanted to make kind of a full-on sort of soul album with a horn section and with backup singers and so on. And I spent maybe a year making this record with just these incredible musicians playing on it. And then it sort of culminated in this show at Space in Evanston, where we had about 200 people come. I had a 12-piece band on the stage. I had a 4-piece horn section. I had my 3 backup singers, and May Cohn, who's this amazing arranger and singer. She sang with Aretha Franklin, and she arranged all the vocals. So the person who arranged all the harmonies, these sort of old school soul harmonies, and then the horn players, who play with the OJs, like who did the arrangements, they came. It was like all the original people who made the record with me. And I did specifically because you told me to. I did not play an instrument for the first time I've ever done so on stage. So I just sang. It was just my thing. They played my songs and I sang. You were like, you got to just get out in front, just let them do their thing and do your thing. And kind of as the night went on, I think I got more and more comfortable, and it just, I've played shows since then, but I was very aware, also a band like that, costs a couple $1,000s just for the band. So I knew that I wasn't going to be doing a tour like that anytime soon with a band like that. And it was a high point of my musical life. Like, it was the show, in front of the band that, was everything I wanted. I dreamed of kind of as the backing band doing these songs for my record. It was just kind of a magical night.
So go and save yourself, and I'll save me.
Yeah, it was incredible to witness, and such a pleasure to see, like I said, as a culmination of all of your hard work, and to have so many people present to witness this extraordinary time. And I think about, if we look back at our lives, we can see these moments where certainly negative circumstances can change the trajectory of our path, but there are certainly those overwhelmingly positive moments as well. And I hope that was one of those for you.
And I can still set you free. So go and save yourself, and I'll save me. Yeah, I'll save me.
I'm curious what words you would offer your younger, blusterier self, the Andrew who sort of blindly powered through everything.
I would say, I would say more than anything, don't be afraid of being flawed. You are worthy. You're worthy, and you're lovable, and you're deserving, and you're not as fragile as you think you are. Because everything felt so. It's funny because I didn't come across as fragile, but underneath it, clearly, I was terrified that if I showed my weakness, that I would break. And interestingly, I can see back. I think I would have been better at connecting with audiences if I'd been better at being more vulnerable when I was younger.
Well, look, hindsight is 20/20, and I believe the saying goes that youth is lost on the young. But the beauty of being able to look back and reflect is that it offers the potential for wisdom in how we move forward. So
yes,
I wonder what this all means for how you move forward in the world and as a singer and as a human being.
What I think is exciting is that what I learned in therapy and in my work with you is that I can learn anything. And I know that I can get good at anything. And if I really want to do it, I know now how to learn to do things. And so this is a sort of a new chapter that's happening for me right now, which is kind of fun and exciting, is that, I can't go tour at the moment because I've got too much going on in my life and my family and so on. A customer of mine a little while back asked me if I wanted to audition for a commercial. And I did. And I didn't get it, but it went really well. And so with her guidance, I took some lessons, and I have an agent in Chicago, and I audition for things. Right now it's on Zoom, but a couple times a week. And, it's still early on in this process, but I am getting so much joy out of the process of learning, and this process of sort of working with a coach. I now know how to do this because of my work with you, because of my way of stripping things down, is that it's the same process. So, I can run an audition, and then she can give me feedback. I can see when she gives me feedback, kind of going, now, I'm just nitpicking, you're still really great, and I'm like, just lay it on me. Tell me everything I'm doing wrong, because I can take it. I know that I can do this. I know that I can get good at this. I know that I have the underlying sort of solidness now that it's okay for me to not be good at this, because I'm gonna be good at this. And that's the thing that I think is exciting to me about sort of my life going forward, is that I'm okay with not being good at things now. It just means you got things to learn, so keep working at it. And that's the lesson I feel like for anyone in the arts is like, you got to find a way to know that you're worthy and that you can be really good at this, and to also recognize if you're not right now. Or if there's something you need to be better at. It's okay. It doesn't mean you can't get there. It doesn't mean all is lost and everything's broken. It means you got work to do, so let's go. Like, that's my lesson to myself.
And if you want to fast track to learning this, your voice is an incredible way to do that.
It really is, because it's such an expression of yourself. Oh my God.
I always say it's the most efficient path to learn some of these hard lessons.
Yeah, no, it was a life-changing time for me. And my work with you was one of the most powerful, profound, moving experiences of my life. And I honestly, I will always have such a deep gratitude and love for you for everything you helped me through and everything you gave me. I cannot believe how fortunate I was to have been introduced to you at that time in my life, because I could not express to people around me how life-changing it was.
Well, and let me reiterate that we were co-conspirators on this journey, and your impact on me has been quite profound as well. So I don't take any of it for granted. So with that said, Andrew, I just want to thank you for your willingness and vulnerability and courage in sharing your story around not only your voice, but your life. So thank you so much for this.
Thanks. I'm really grateful that you thought of me. This has been really fun.
Okay, how incredible was that? I mean, he got hit by a truck, and he's here to talk about it and to share with us this incredible wisdom, and specifically as it applied to his voice journey. I am just baffled by that and so grateful for it. I would encourage you to go check out andrewkerr.com. It's ANDREWKERR.com. And check out his music. Listen to the progression that he refers to. He's right. Some of his lyrics, especially early on in his career, they are clever. But this last album that he's released, it is undeniably his best. He sounds amazing at it, and it's a testament to his work and effort. Also, if you want to connect with me more, please visit davinyoungs.com. Follow me on all the socials, Instagram, Twitter, etc. at Davin Youngs. If you like this podcast, if you like what I'm trying to do, if you want to support this and help it grow, make sure to rate, make sure to review, make sure to subscribe, to like, to share, tell other people that you're listening to it. It really, really makes a difference. And it's a way in which we can try to compete with this almighty algorithm. In the meantime, I'm wishing you blessings on your voice journey, and may you know the freedom, the growth, the transformation that only your voice can bring. Peace.